Hello, today we're going to make a confidence intervals using Excel. I have right here kind of a guide to remind us from our notes how we actually do confidence intervals by hand, and we're going to then use this guide to figure out on Excel. So let's start with average. Now, there's two kind of confidence intervals, one for average, one for percents. I'm going to start with the average, which is the GPA. I actually, for my paper, I was looking at just, I want to compare the GPA of men and women or females, so I need to get a confidence interval for just the females. So to do that, I first actually have to go to my data for a second. I want to look at just females, so to do that, I'm first going to put a filter on. So to do a filter, I can do Control-Shift-L all at once. You see those little filters pop up, and I'm going to sort it. Now, I'm not going to hide males. If I hide males, it kind of compresses them, and they're still going to secretly be in there, and I won't know where. I'm just going to reorder it A to Z. Great. Now I can see the females, and then I can just select that data. So going back over here, I'm going to go equals average. All right, click on the average, and then I'm going to go over to my data and just select the GPA for females, moving on down all the way through all of the females. Once I have all the females selected, I just hit enter, and now I have my average for females. And note, I made this average just using this key here, nice and readable, just 2 digits after it. Now for standard deviation, exactly the same thing. It's as a sample, so I do .s, go over to data, and again, I'm going to select that GPA just for females all the way down through all of the females. All right, I've selected all the females, stopping right here before the males, hit enter, and now I have my standard deviation. All right, so what I've done here for mean is I've described my distribution, right? I've got my mean, my standard deviation, but I need my standard error actually when I'm doing this sample distribution. So that's a little different. So I'm going to use the equation that I see right here, which is standard deviation divided by the square root of n. So I click on standard deviation. I hit divide. The square root is SQ. RT, I'll just double click on that, and then N. This is for women. I know from the past data crunching I've done that I have 53 females, so I write 53 in there, enter, and now I have my standard error. Perfect. Margin of error, okay, so going back over here, I've got standard error. Margin of error is when I times it by Z, so I need to think about how much confidence I want to have. Up here, I'm going to go for a 95% confidence level, so it's going to equal 1.96 times, and I just click on that standard error. So again, just this equation right here, hit enter. There's my margin of error. Now I just need to find my upper and my lower, which is I just take the mean and I subtract the margin of error, take the mean and add it. So again, I take my mean, and to find my upper, I add the margin of error. And to find my lower, I take the mean and I subtract the margin of error. With these results, I can now say I'm 95% confident that females at grants will have a GPA between 3.54 and 3.72. Now let's move on to percents. Now for percents, I'm going to look at the percents that people travel. So I first need to find my p hat, and I'm going to be over here at percents. So it always starts by finding the mean and standard error. So to find my p hat, I actually go to my pivot table where I crunch some numbers. I have figured out the percent that travel, all right here. So I'm going to use that number for my CI, and that percent is 0.88. I have to write 0.88 because when we deal with percents, those are numbers for show, but numbers to do mathematically, they actually has to be in that decimal form. Standard error, we have this equation right here, so I'm going to plug that in. Square root, it's a little more complicated. So I've got a square root. I know I'm multiplying this times, in parentheses, 1 minus that p hat again, and I'm dividing all of it by n, which so it says n right here, which I know from the research I've done before is 123. And now I have my standard error. My margin of error right here, here's that equation. I'm going to take my standard error and multiply it by Z. So I'm going to do the 95% again, and I'm just going to times it by my standard error. There it is. And now I'm going to find my lower and my upper by taking the p hat and adding and subtracting it. So I just click on my p hat, and I add it to my margin of error, and I click on the p hat again, and I subtract it from my margin of error. In some ways, it's actually easier than doing it with a calculator. All right, and so I now can say I'm 95% confident that between 82% and 94% of students at Grant have traveled to another country. I hope that was helpful.